I've had trouble uploading the recording, so hopefully I'll figure this out after this. But anyway, hi everybody. So we're going to do see theme Zayin through Yud Daled, I believe, is to the end of Kuf Hey, and we'll do it all out of the Shulchan Aruch today. And just to remind us, we've been talking about this whole thing in Kuf, and this is up to now in Kuf Hey, is really the question of when two foods interact with one another. You know, what does the status, does the flavor, whatever it may be, transfer between the two of them, and you know, under what conditions does that happen? And so right now in Zayin, we're going to talk about two pieces that are touching. And remember, we talked about before this that if, unlike bishul, when there's a liquid medium that transfers flavor, in sli, it may not be a full transfer of flavor. It may only get a layer or something like that, except for if it's fatty. And in the case of roasting, it may not even matter which is the fatty piece. Even if the isur is lean and the heter is fatty, that somehow the heter's fattiness becomes a conduit for transferring the tam of the isur when they're being roasted together, even with no liquid medium between the two of them.
So it you know, I know it's not technically a liquid medium,
yeah,
but roasted fat does have a liquid quality to it. So I think that's actually what's at play here, right?
Yeah, I agree with you, and the way I think about it, and I haven't looked enough to see if anybody else says this, but bishul is cooking with an external liquid, and fattiness is cooking with an internal liquid. And you know, internal liquids become as anybody knows, right? I mean, I think the best example that I can think, I mean, cooking chicken, cooking fish though is actually right, because fish, when you cook fish, right, you see the fat come up as like maybe just salmon. Maybe I mainly only make salmon, so people think I'm crazy here, right? When you roast salmon, the white fat surfaces up and actually you know, comes to the top. So it becomes a liquid in some sense. It becomes bishul almost. So, okay, good. So with that, let's, we're going to do some of this inside and some of it not, just based on a time constraint here. So I thought maybe we'll just like people can remember, they can kind of glance over Zayin in the Shulchan Aruch. It basically a huge limitation on this idea that two pieces that touch transfer flavor to one another. What's that big limitation?
As long as the isur has to be internal to it. External isur that was balua does not. There's no issue in it. It's no god.
Perfect, right? It's machmat atzma, with a couple exceptions though. Well, okay, first off, there's a huge debate over basar b'chalav that goes on here, right? The Shulchan Aruch, remember, right? He says, right, machmat atzma. He gives two examples. He says nevela, right? So if it's a nevela piece touching a kasher piece, right, that would be a machmat atzma and could transfer. And basar b'chalav is, he says, a machmat atzma case as well. And we've seen cases like this, right? The idea that basar b'chalav is its own isur, right? It's because it wasn't asur before, but there's a huge amount of pushback from the Taz, from the Shach, right? And part of the proof of that, right, is the Mishnah that we looked at in Chulin, in Kol Avasar, talks about a case. I mean, there's a whole debate about where the pieces of meat are, but a drop of milk that falls on a piece of meat that is outside of the rotev doesn't seem to transfer its flavor to everybody else, to all the other pieces, right? And or you know, you can't marshal. Actually, it goes the other way. You can't marshal those forces against it unless you stir it or cover it, and that seems to imply that basar b'chalav is not inherently transferring flavor of basar b'chalav to other pieces it's touching in a roasting case.
So when it's saying the two pieces of meat touching or a piece of whatever touching, this is roasting, right? There still has to be a medium of heat.
Either they're roasting or they're hot, or potentially salted, as we'll see later, right? That's another possibility. Right. But yeah, there has to be some, right? Flavor transfers, you know, generally takes something in it that transfers the flavor, like liquid or so, and it takes either heat or some other, you know, possibility. We'll even see at some point, not in this siman, but you know, knives, right? There's a possibility that cutting itself, the knife, is almost a cooking source, but maybe that's a very complicated case, and we're not going there yet. So, but good. And so the other thing with this is, right, if you look at the end of the Mechaber on this, he says Bamed Devarim Amarim Bal'a Isur She'eno Mefafea Aval Bala Min Advarim HaMefafeim Betivan Kegon Shuman Oser Chaverta Ben Bitzli Ben Menogat Zoba Zocham Becham, right? And so, but if we're talking about two fatty or a fatty piece of Isur, right, and this is the difference between the Tzali case. If you're bolea an isur and it's a fatty isur that you're bolea, that might be a problem. So
I was thinking about this as like oils and waters not mixing.
Interesting. Yeah. So this is what leads, by the way, some people to make the split about whether basar bechalav does count as machmat asmar or not, as the difference between if you absorb milk versus you absorb cheese. Potentially, that those might be different cases. One is fatty, one is not. But I believe the Gra says that, and somebody, maybe the Marshal, somebody else says it as well. But okay, that's Zayin. The Ramah adds a kind of an important Haggah here. So he says, I'll just read it, the Haggah at the bottom of Zayin, B'chol zeh b'shtei chatichot, aval kli shebala isur oser heter shenogea bo afilu be'isur she'eno shamen, right? That don't think, right, that that if you have cooked pork in your pot, and then no, not pork, you cook something that's not fatty, I don't know, whatever, you cook, we'll do this, you cook chametz in your pot, right? And then it's Pesach and you put something in it, you're like, oh, it's not fatty, it's not, I'm just roasting it, it's not a problem. Don't think that actually is a problem, the Ramah says, and Kelim seem to have their own kind of definition going on there. So
because that's the way Kelim work.
Exactly.
Otherwise, you would never have Kelim issues.
Yes, exactly. And this is, I think, a continuous thing in Yisur V'Heter is when do Kelim act like food and when do Kelim act like their own category? Right, in the same way, right, but one of the great kulot of Kelim doesn't seem to apply to food, right? If an Isur that's Bolea, if it sits with the Balua for 24 hours, it doesn't become Tam Lifgam, right, automatically, where it does in a Kli, right? That's the Kula of Kelim in some ways. So, okay. That's all. Wow. All right. I took a lot of time there. Chet is the case of the kulia. Does anybody remember this is a machloket between, in some way, semi-machloket between the Mechaber and the Ramah. The kulia, right, of course, is the kidney, which has chalev around it when it's cooked. What if the kidney gets cooked with the chalev, or it gets roasted with the chalev, rather, I should add, which is a fatty substance, obviously. Chalev is itself a fat. What does the Mechaber say?
It doesn't penetrate
that the karum. Yeah, go ahead, Evan.
It doesn't penetrate the membrane, and therefore it's okay.
Exactly. And the Ramah says
no.
Yeah, and there's two reasons in the Achronim given for the Ramah's pushback here. Anybody? I don't know if anyone. We saw one of them in class.
That you can't be sure it might have cracked.
Exactly, right. The membrane may not be a full membrane; it may have holes in it. So, and then flavor would go. The other one is. Did anyone look at the other?
On the inside?
Actually, that wasn't the other one, and I think maybe the Taz in Yud Zayin is a very quick version of this. He says, "Hatam de lo samchinan al terud ze b'gemara." All right. He's like, we don't really. That's an answer. It's Rav Huna Bar Yehuda, I believe, in the Gemara, who's one of two answers to a problem that we have. Maybe that's just not the halacha. Like, at the end of the day, it's that simple. And even though the Mechaber takes his halacha, the Ramah has a yeshos osrim. He's a yeshos stream, but okay.
It's a yeshos stream, but it's a yeshos stream, but it's v'chen nohagim.
Exactly, and that's our practice. It's always an interesting question with the Ramah, but sometimes he says ve'en l'shanot, right? Like, don't change, don't go follow the Mechaber there if you're from Ashkenaz. But it's always a question with the Ramah when he has a v'chein nohagim. Sometimes he'll put in, except in if there's a hefsed or if there's a great need or whatever it may be, and so there is room to be makil because of the Mechaber. But you're right, the practice in Ashkenaz is to not. By the way, not a huge thing that happens in the modern day world, right? We nowadays all this stuff is, at least I don't know about, maybe it may be different in some places. In where I live, I order boxes of meat from Grow and Behold, and all this stuff is pre-prepared for me. So it's not something I worry about. Okay. Now we have the rule in Tet of salting. First off, actually, I think it's very important because we kind of glanced over this, like what counts as being salted in the case of salt transferring flavor.
It's to turn it completely inedible.
Exactly, right? It has to be, this isn't just, I put some salt to flavor my chicken and it was cold and it touched a piece of, cold non-kosher chicken that had some salt on it, but it was not to salt to get the blood out. I mean, to flavor it, I put some salt on it. We're talking about like lots of salt, like to get the blood out, that kind of level of salting. So, okay. And so if I have a salted piece and I salt, let's say, a piece of meat with its chalev on it, for instance, but what's the rule?
You need a klipa.
Good, you need a klipa. Okay, and then right, the Shulchan Aruch says we may even go to Netilas Makom. And that's for not even real chalev. That's for if it's Shuman Hagid and Knoknot and the crew, all the stuff around like the Gida Nashef, for instance, right? But if it's actually like real chalev, right, then you need, what do you need? You need 60 to be mevatel it, because salt transfers flavor. And right, there's an additional piece. Maybe someone want to read actually starting ve'ima basar shneim lachimo. This is an important piece.
Just a quick question: when it says v'im hu chalev mamash tzarich levatlo, is the antecedent is the chalev? Because we're talking about the Shulchan Aruch, it's not the whole piece of meat right now, since he doesn't hold by chanan. Right? It's just the chalev that needs shishim.
Yeah, just need the chalev needs shishim. Yeah. So as far as I could tell. So that's the Shulchan Aruch's general, and it's a good review too. The Shulchan Aruch's general position is that in a non-basar b'chalav, only in basar b'chalav do we have a case of chanan. The Rama, on the other hand, seems to hold chanan for everything, for shar yisurim. So, okay, v'ima basar shenim lachimo. We'll read this one inside. Does everyone see where that is?
No, could you say it again?
V'ima basar shenim lachimo.
I can read it.
It's right where the kafchet from the shach is.
Okay, I can read it if you want.
Go for it, please. Yeah.
All right. ואם הבשר נמלח עמו הוא שמן, אפילו בשומן הגיד וכנוקנות שבו צריך 60 לבטלו, ולטום במקום שנגע כדי נטילת מקום לפחות קליפה. וכל זה לעניין חתיכה עצמה שהיה חלב דבוק בה, ולעניין שאר חתיכות שנמלחו יחד, אם אין בכל אחד מהם בפני עצמה 60 לבטל החלב, אסורות ואין מצטרפים ביחד לבטל החלב. ואין חלב מפעפע וחתיכה לחתיכה ולא רוטב.
Yeah. All right. So here, this is like we get a major chumrah kind of out of this, right? So first, if it's a fatty piece, that's enough to kind of get us back into this fatty situation that you need 60 to be mevatel. And if you have a bunch of pieces, right, you can't say that all the forces get marshaled though, of like you have 60 pieces of salted meat and one piece of salted meat with chalev, right? You can't say it's 60-1, right? You just say that the pieces that touched it, those themselves now need to be 60 against it.
What if you cover the pot and stir it? Then
remember we're actually not talking about we're not even talking about a hot situation here. We're talking about a cold situation. This is all salted. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, potentially you could have something like that. This is kind of like
that would sort of be like the way out. That would be sort of the quick solution.
Exactly. So, but good, right? Because he says, right, the chalev is not mefafeh, mechaticha lechaticha bil rotev. And now there's two cases he brings up here. He says, what if you don't know if it touched all of them, then you treat them all as asur, okay? But if you know that it only touched one of them, like I have let's say I have, I don't know, 5 pieces in there, and I touch one of them touched my chalev salted piece, then it would be bitul barov, right? That's solid pieces. So there, actually, it's not so bad. And then there's a very long Ramah on this. And we're not going to do it inside, but remember the Ramah has the whole thing where he assumes that every piece is fatty, which is a problem for him, because that's going to get him in a situation where if you assume everything is fatty, then maybe, there is like an automatic transfer between all the pieces, and therefore you can treat it as 60-to-1 ratio, and that these pieces can marshal their forces. So what he has to do is he says, we're machmir about not teaching things fatty, except where it makes us makil, and then we're also machmir, and then we follow the machaber, essentially. So I just want to say that again. He says, right, we are generally machmir to treat everything as fatty, that it transfers flavor, except in the cases where treating everything as fatty makes us makil, because that means that you can marshal the forces of all the different pieces because you consider them fatty. And so he says, there we're going to be machmir the other way, essentially. So he's going to take chumrot in both sides of this. But he does add, and I'll say this. He says, look, the whole thing where I said that we treat everything as a fatty piece, that is only the case where there's actually fat involved, like chametz on Pesach. That's why I used that example earlier. The Ramah says chametz on Pesach is not. If I have a piece of wheat, or flour rather, like I have some piece of flour, I have some, a piece of bread. It's not fatty, so I can't treat it as. I treat it in these cases as lean and not fatty. So it doesn't transfer just because it's salted, just because it's or just because it's transfer like completely into the other piece, or if it's like roasted with it or something like that. So, but that was a very quick covering of the entire Ramah there. But hopefully that's about, just time wise, I think that's what we have time to do right now. So maybe any questions or thoughts before we do the rest of them? I see Noam is looking intently, so I assume he seems.
No,
like
I'm good. Okay. I'm gonna get it.
So good. So maybe Yud is short and it's important, so maybe we should read it inside. But it's going to be an okimta on this entire case here. So someone want to read Yud inside?
I can read.
Yeah, go for it.
Amarim she'isur v'hater shnehem luchim v'afilu isur maliach v'hater tafel aval im haheter maluach v'isur tafel enu srich ela hadacha. And then Ramah adds v'yesh osrim im nogin zebazeh v'yesh lakel b'makom hefsed. So Makaber says that the only time the salting principle work is if minimally the isur piece is salty. But when it's only the heter that's salty, then it doesn't apply. But of course, the Ramah says that we're still going to be prohibitive unless it's an hefsed case.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's right. It has to be that the actual isur is the salty piece. Also, a good word, tafel, with a taf means unsalted. I don't know if there's an English word for that, if anyone knows of one.
It's also used to be bland, but I guess.
What was that?
Bland. It can
bland.
Sort of like a different use of the word, but yeah.
Yeah. All right, I'll take it. So bland. And Yud Aleph, which I'm going to do quickly here, is really just a question of, well, all these rules of saltiness is tata gavar. Do we go by the bottom piece, right? So if you have an isur that's salted and you have a heter that's unsalted, bland, sorry, right? So if that's osir, if it's fatty, it's osir up to shishim, right? That's only if the salted piece is on the bottom and the heter is on the top. And the Ramah, of course, says that malicha, no, we don't care about position in space. That's not relevant here. Which I just want to say my own take on the Rama. I didn't look too deeply in everybody else on it. Is yeah, the whole idea of Tata Gavar has to do with like cooking, right? It has to do with where the heat's coming from. And does heat on the bottom matter versus heat on the top, and that doesn't seem like it would apply for salting. That seems like a whole different case. Like one is about kind of the physics, not physics, but at least the experience of cooking, we'll call it that. And salting to me would seem different, but that's just my own thought. Okay, good. Yud Bet and Yud Gimel actually I think are good. Yud Bet is about if you have gavina, right? You're making cheese in a mold that is owned by non-Jews, right? And you salt the cheese when you make it in this mold. And the whole question would be like, well, what's the status of this? It's salted. Does it, transfer flavor? And the Shulchan Aruch says, no, that's it's mutar. Although he seems to be in a b'diavad situation there, just based on his language, right? Because he says gavinot shena'asu b'dfusei. He doesn't say, osim gavinot b'dfusei akum. He says shena'asu. So, and the Rama adds, right, that's any case where if you salt, something that's a heter in an Isur Kli, that's not a problem at the end of the day, because it's a great line here. He says, "De'in maliach kiroteach kol kach leaflit min hakli masher balu betocho." All right, and he says, "Bedafka v'di'avad," right? He says, salting, it's cooking, but it's not that strongly cooking, right? Let's not go too far with it. And then actually the Machaber in the next piece adds, right? So therefore, he says you can have salt or spices that are in a meat container, in a meat dish, and you can take them out and put it on your milchuk stuff, right? Not a problem. You can store your salt in your meat pot and use it for your milchuks.
It's very interesting because you would be very hard pressed to find a case when that would even happen. Because my assumption is it's probably your meat salt, but your meat salt just has probably not been used in 24 hours anyway.
It's a fair point.
Right.
Yeah, no, it's a very good point. But I mean, the only thing I can think about is, it's like you had to dump your salt into some container and you just grab
really
something
quickly, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And you put it in there. I don't know how. It's always, this is always the hard thing of like, how did they store food in their day? It's always hard to tell like what practice was going on. So yeah, but and by the way, the Rama of course adds, he says, look, not only does that work for basar b'chalav, where we're a little bit more lenient, because right, if you put your salt in a basar container, you didn't do anything wrong, right? You can do that, and so then you can use it. We're actually more makil about cases like that. He says that even counts if like you have your non-Jewish friend had a container he cooks pork in all the time, right? You can put your salt in that and then take it out and put it on your food, and that's not a problem either. He says, but if you don't do that, tavo alacha bracha, right? It's good. Don't, it's better not to do it potentially. I think he gets those words from the Tosfot, if I remember correctly. Okay, I have like half a minute. So the last case is the case of if you have salt that was used to take blood out, and if you then put it in a dish, do you need 60 against it? If there's 60 against the melach itself, then it's mutar to eat. But even though salt normally, remember, gives more than 60-to-1 flavor, right? Salt is like an incredibly spicy thing. He says no. Here it's even though you might think it might be more than 60-to-1, it's only 60-to-1. And the Rama kind of explains that. And the Rama adds this. I mean, I'll end with this. The very end of the Rama, which is I think a very important idea. Dechol makom she'ein ha'oser yachol lelech. Right? Any place that the thing that's forbidden can't go, right? The forbidding thing can't go. The thing that is made forbidden, can't be can't make it more osir. In other words, blood cannot penetrate the way salt penetrates, and therefore, just because the salt, which has blood in it, can penetrate and make things asur, doesn't mean that it then carries the blood with it, essentially. So
That's weird phrasing because I didn't think at this point it was a question of like where it's getting to. That made sense when we were discussing like the fat and stuff. This felt like it was sort of
yeah,
mixing concepts.
but I think the idea is, you're right. I think it is a little bit too. I think it's more the idea of the salt doesn't give the blood more power than the blood had on its own. Would
Right.
be to say. It may be
Yeah.
a better way to say it. So, all right, that I went over time and I apologize, and I went quickly, so I apologize about that as well. But we did a lot. So, any final questions before?
I had a question about Yud, if I could.
Yeah, go for it.
I just had a hard time when I imagine things getting salted and then being up against each other. Like salting things is you have a piece of meat or fish or whatever it is, and then you have salt on top of it, around it.
Yeah.
So then if it's adjacent to like another piece that's like, then you just have like meat, salt, meat. And so like the idea of like one of them being maluach and one of them being tafel, does that have to do with like yeah. Because also we
Yeah,
haven't said that it takes a certain amount of time for it to become maluach. We've just said like immediately as long yeah.
Yeah, good. I remember looking at this at some point, and it was a while ago. But I think the idea would be that someone talks about the idea that it's like there's a time factor, right? That one of them, just because it touched salt, it doesn't automatically become salted. And I don't remember. I'm gonna see if I remember. I'll try to look back and see where I remember seeing that at some point. But yeah, it's a good question. Like, doesn't something that touches a salty thing become salted automatically? And the answer is no. But why is a good question. So, but all right, Toph. I will
Great.
see
Thanks,
everybody.
Joel.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Go ahead.
And next week
Talk to you.
we're doing two Simanim, correct?
We're doing two Simanim.
Kuva.
I mean,
Kuvzan.
We'll see if Rav Nachum gets through all of it, but yes.
I understand. Theoretically, understood.
Theoretically. So.
All right, take care,
All
everyone.
right, everyone.
No.
Bye.